what's the difference between colonization and slavery, right? To me, it's like they're cousins. They look alike. They're a little bit different, but they look alike. A lot of
Mhm.
similarity, right? For me, born and raised in Europe, especially Belgium, because Belgium colonized Congo, where my dad is from, for over 100 years. Um, the only representation of success that I had at that time was African American.
Hey y'all, welcome to Inside Out Podcast Season 2. I'm your host, Yamoria Wright. The intention of this podcast is to enrich your life with behind the scenes interviews and conversations from thought leaders, entrepreneurs, and creatives about how they live their lives from the inside out. Enjoy. What's up, y'all? Hello. Welcome to another episode of Inside Out Podcast. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. If you are listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or Audible, or iHeartRadio, make sure that you follow the podcast and leave comments. Like, let's continue the conversation, right? So today I have with me Angel Kaba. Angel and I actually have not seen each other in person since 2017, probably 2016. Yes, yeah, almost a decade, which is very wild to think. But we have stayed connected over the years. And Angel recently contacted me about a very specific conversation that is actually already circulating as of yesterday. A very popular podcast has already had a viral clip centering this conversation. But before we get into it, I want y'all to learn more about Angel. Angel Kaba is an international artistic director and award-winning choreographer based in Brooklyn, New York. Angel has more than 20 years of experience in art production, youth development, and women empowerment. Angel holds a BA in marketing management from Brussels Business School. Currently, she is a faculty member at Broadway Dance Center, Alvin Ailey Extension, and Steps on Broadway. Angel is an NYFA alumni from IAP, the Immigrant Artist Program, a board member of the Steps Support Black Artists, SSBA, supported by the Steps Beyond Foundation in New York City to empower Black voices in the arts of dance. And lately, she joined the Dear Community of Artists from the Caribbean Cultural Center and African Diaspora Institute. Throughout her career, Angel has collaborated with artists like Coolio, Orishas, K Styles, Rihanna, Kanye West, Taye Diggs, Track Dilla, Burna Boy, Salif Keita, Eddie Kenzo, Diamond Platnumz, and others. Further notable experiences involved stage, television, and commercial performances, and dancing for world-renowned brands like Coca-Cola, Levi's, Fructis by Garnier, Nutella, Universal, Roc Nation, MTV, NBC, Essence Festival, Madison Square Garden, and Snapchat, y'all. Angel is also the founder of the platform Afro Dance New York, fiscally sponsored by NYFA, created in 2016 to celebrate diversity, community, and global culture. As a well-respected African Caribbean woman from the République Démocratique of Congo and Martinique, Angel is passionate about uplifting Black experiences and stories from around the globe. Hey, Angel.
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I'm well. How was my friend? Did I do okay? The République Démocratique Congo. How did I do? How did I
That's
do?
good. That's good. You have a good French accent.
Good. I am my first. Okay, so the first language other than standard English that I wanted to explore in elementary school was actually sign language, ASL.
Okay.
So I got at a book fair, I got a sign language, like short little sign language, a small sign language dictionary. And I knew a little bit of sign language. And then the next language was Spanish. I was always curious about people from all over the world. And my fifth and sixth grade teacher, I had her 2 years in a row. She taught fifth and sixth grade. She taught us French.
Oh,
And
really?
so she taught us the song, I might not even be able to. I probably was better at it when I was younger, but it's Joya anniversaire, happy birthday to you, Joya anniversaire. So
That is
she
so
taught,
cute.
yeah. So So yeah, it helps me a little bit. I maybe need to get on Duolingo and
Yeah, right.
really
That's
sharpen my skills. But I studied Spanish for almost 10 years collectively from
okay.
junior high through college. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Also, you have a
that
good
might help.
level, bro.
Yeah, that might help a little bit. But enough about Yamoria. We all know her. Angel, please tell us more about how you came into dance as an art form, as an expression of yourself.
I think first of all, my mom introduced me to dance because she used to be a dancer. She used to be a folk Caribbean traditional dancer, in Martinique. And then that's how she got to Europe. She got picked into a dance company and she got into Europe. Then she did other things after that. But that's how I got introduced to dance and movement. I would say first through my roots. Like I said, my mom is Caribbean from Martinique, and my dad is from Congo. But my mom, really introduced me to the arts, I would say, because she loves to dance, to sing, to act. She was really an artist and a creative, and she still is actually. So that was my first introduction to dance music and movement. And then my first training was ballet. I did ballet for like 15
Okay.
years back in
For how many years?
15.
15 years.
Yeah,
A
it was a journey.
ballerina.
It was an interesting journey. So I did that first, and then I went on and I was playing piano. So it was, learning music theory and stuff as well
Hmm.
as theater and singing. So I was really like throughout my teens. And then around like 16, 17, I, fell in love with hip hop culture. So I was rapping with my cousins and stuff,
I love
in
that.
French, and I was
Mhm.
listening to, American hip hop music, Tupac Shakur, Biggie Small. I was very fan of Tupac, but that was my thing, and I didn't speak English, well, so I was like, "Yay, what you want? What you need?" But I was in the past, and because of my connection with dance and movement, automatically it was, really attracted, I would say, by hip hop dance. And that's
Mhm.
really like how I started embracing the arts to, I would say, a highest level.
Yeah, yeah. That's amazing. That's amazing. So so obviously hip hop culture, you were introduced to it at an early age. What was your experience? Because we're gonna get into it, y'all. We're gonna get right into it. I'm excited about this conversation though, because we have a very we're here for a reason. We got something to say today. We got something to say today. Um, but what was your viewpoint growing up, or your point of view, your perspective of what Black America was like, the experiences of Black Americans?
Yeah, sure. I had no idea. Because again, and maybe people who are going to watch this interview, they're going to disagree with me, and that's okay. Let's have conversation, please.
Mm,
Use the comment section and then, express yourself. Um, the way we received hip hop in Europe, especially I'm going to talk about Belgium and France because that's where I grew up, both
mm-hmm.
countries. We receive it at the very important time where we needed also a voice to express ourselves, and
Okay.
hip hop was there at the right time to kind of uplift us and support us into this journey of being black in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very hard for us to make concrete connections with what it is to be Black in America because it's through a lens of music and TV and what people, pick and choose to put on television for us to have access to. So it's not completely wrong, but it's not completely correct neither. So, I used to, woke up like 2 a.m. and then I was like recording cassettes, VHS cassettes,
Mm-hmm.
MTV rap and all the things, and I was like asking my mom to, I don't know, I wanted to wear the same clothes of Aaliyah, or
Mm-hmm.
TLC was releasing like a new haircut, and then me and my cousin were like, in the magazine, and we want to look like, T-boys. I remember the
Mm-hmm.
T-boys, haircut with the blonde. Yeah, that
Oh
one
yeah.
like super famous in the African community back
Mm-hmm.
then. And my mom, because she was an artist and also she was doing hair and makeup, so she was very open minded with that. She was listening to soul music, she was
Okay.
listening to our jazz music, to rock, everything. So my mom was very open minded. Luckily, And then she was like, "Yeah, you can listen to hip hop. You can wear like baggy jeans. I don't care as long as you're going to school and you do what you got to do." So
I
my mom
love that.
is very open when it comes to that, and she was very curious about a lot of things. I remember my
Mhm.
mom watching television. We were like watching like everything that's happening with Nelson Mandela and stuff. So my mom was very open minded, right? So this unfortunately was my first introduction to Black culture. It was
Okay.
really through the lens of music, television,
Hmm.
also through film and cinema. I mean, the Hollywood, of course, but also Spike Lee. Like I was watching a lot of Spike Lee movies and stuff like that. So I had an understanding about what was available, to us at that time.
Yeah, yeah. That is that, you're saying a lot there. And I went to London. I was in London for only 5 weeks actually, but it was a still a transformative 5 weeks. And that
Mhm.
was, geez, almost 10 years ago. That was in 2015. And I was hanging out with my friends, extended family, and they were talking about how their viewpoint of, and they had traveled to America. They were actually they're East African, Eritrean, but they were sharing about how the media and what they see of African Americans, that they first of all they preferred um, content that was created in the States, right? Black content created in the States, but also some of them had a very, like, they thought Black Americans were like just gangsters, honestly, because of the content, the content. One of them was like more culture. Her mind was like a little more culturally expanded. She understood a little bit more. I think she was also a little more well traveled. But one of them just thought, it's like, well, this is what we see. Now she didn't think that necessarily of me. She had enough depth to understand, like, it's not everybody, but she did think very much so, like, Black Americans, walk around, shoot them up, shoot them up, shoot them up. Um, and it was a very interesting conversation, Angel. But I want to talk about the conversation of culture.
Mhm.
We kind of talked about this in our pre-interview, but I in my and this is like, I it's funny in conversations. Eventually, you got to tell your story, right? You can't keep
Right?
it close forever.
Let's
But
go.
my closest friends in college were the majority of. Well, they were all first generation. Their parents had immigrated from somewhere, whether it was the Caribbean or West or East Africa.
Hmm.
But and so all my closest friends in college were first generation African,
Hmm.
from different locales in Africa, different countries. And I recall, some of them I had a lot in common with. Well, all of them I did. Some of them understood my parents moving from Indiana to California, as not an immigration story, but a migration story, right? Because of the different, geographically very different places, Gary, Indiana, the Bay Area.
Yeah.
Um, and my parents were a part of that. I guess one would maybe call it the second Great Migration, when a lot of African Americans were moving. A lot of them were actually moving to LA, but also moving throughout California. The next wave in the 80s of African Americans relocating from the South and Midwest to California. Any case, there was an instance where I had made we were bantering on email, because back then it wasn't text message. It was like
Right.
2009, right? So we would just be on email and G chat all day long when we were at work. And I had said something, and one of my friends had gotten offended and was like, nobody, she said something. I was like, aha, that's so black of you, or something. She's like, don't nobody want to be African American. Like, it was just like, she took it as an offense, but also I saw something where it was like a glimpse of being African American was less than. And I think that might have been the first time it was brought into my awareness that it
Hmm.
was something that was taught. I knew other people thought that,
Hmm.
right? Other non Black folk. But I wasn't that aware of how those conversations were circulating, and those thoughts, those thought processes were within other Black folk from different places. Can you talk more about that?
It's very interesting, and sometimes it's a little bit uncomfortable, to
Mhm.
talk about these things, especially amongst us Black and brown people. So something I wanted to add as well is like, for me, right, a black girl, African, Caribbean, black girl born in Europe. I'm not born
Mhm.
on the African continent because then my story will be different, right? And my
Right.
experience also about blackness will be different. So I am born into a different system of oppression, right? Created in Europe.
Mm,
That's one thing. Something
mhm,
that's also very interesting is like, the concept of slavery in Europe is different, the understanding of it, but colonization or post colonization, that's
mhm,
the thing, right? And I like to, when I talk about it, when I teach dance and movement, it's like, what's the difference between colonization and slavery, right? To me, it's like they're cousins, they look alike, they're a little bit different, but they look alike,
mhm,
a lot of
mhm.
similarity, right? So for me, born and raised in Europe, especially Belgium, because Belgium colonized Congo, where my dad is from, for over 100 years. Um, the only representation of success that I had at that time was African American.
Okay.
So Americans. So regardless of it's Hollywood is not completely what it is. It's hip hop. Yes, hip hop is not, the only culture that we have here in America. I understand. But for me, the representation of success that people that look like me were African Americans at that
Why
time,
is that, Angel?
because I'm born and raised in Europe and Belgium. Belgium, it's a white country, so what you see
Mhm.
around you is white people.
White people,
So
yeah.
yeah, your connection with success, your connection with everything is just white. I
Mhm,
mean, I have connections amongst my family, friends, and stuff like that. But the high level of, successful people. You see
yeah.
Oprah Winfrey on television. We didn't have any Oprah. We still don't have any Oprah in
Mhm,
Belgium. For instance, that doesn't exist at all. Then you can
mhm.
also talk about, capitals and money and stuff like that. So that's another conversation when it comes to market and business of influences. I'm just talking about pure representation.
Yeah.
Now me compared for me was just like, oh my God. I remember like I don't know, they released like a collection of backpack at that time. I think it was in the 90s and stuff. So it was Naomi, it was Kate Moss, it was Cindy Crawford and stuff like that. Oh yeah, we ran with my mom. Like
Wow.
everybody was online, to have my first backpack. I didn't even have black dolls. Like my daughter now, she has so many dolls.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I didn't have all of that. So it's important to take that in consideration when I share my story and my point of view about that. So
Mhm,
my connection with African American culture and black representation and stuff like that was that through arts, culture, movement, but also civil rights movement.
mhm,
Think about those leaders who are inspiring the world, still inspiring the world. Like this is big. We do have amazing leaders like, Patrice A. Lumumba, for instance. They are the amazing
mhm,
leaders and inspiration from Africa as well. But hey, when you think about, I was telling you through film and stuff like that. I watched when I was in Europe, Shaka Zulu, but also Malcolm X.
mhm,
Dr. King. So I think people forget about that. I think it's interesting to be African or Caribbean descent or whatever, being in America and think like
mhm,
nobody wants to be African American, forgetting the fact that as Black people, even if I'm African or Caribbean, nobody knows the difference between you and I, except,
mhm,
okay, when I start speaking, I have a French accent, right? But if you look at each other, we could be like, bestie,
mhm,
cousin, nobody will know, right? So I feel like
mhm.
it's interesting to me to be in America free, right? You are free, we are free today, right? I can have a job, I can just do whatever I want because some people
Mhm.
fought for us. And I think it's interesting to be here as a Black person, benefiting from all of that, and then thinking like nobody wants to be African American, or we better than African American. That to me, I think it's crazy to think that way, but that's just my opinion, and I respect everybody's opinion. My Also, when you think about pop culture, you think about even sports in general,
Yeah.
like, like, I mean, yes, there was a lot of money that is put into different programs, yes, for sure. But if you think about it, how African Americans as a group is inspiring the world today. And
Mhm.
then of course there is negative aspect everywhere, right? And nobody is perfect. I think, me personally, when I moved from Europe actually to America, and then I'm now Black. Nobody cares about where you exactly from. What they see is who you are. So this is Black. There's
Yeah.
nothing that you can debate about that. That's what people see. So, yeah, but don't shoot me because I'm African. Like, who cares, right? So, so imagine, I think you're better than African American. Okay, I don't shoot you. I shoot like that. Don't make any sense.
Hmm.
So also, learning about arts in general, I mean, movement and music and all of that. I had to educate myself about the history of people that look like me.
Got you.
Right? I'm here. I want to understand what it is. What does that mean to tell me like I'm from the South or I'm
Hmm.
from the Bronx, New York? I want to understand what it is. I want to understand. I was like, oh yeah, she's from the Bronx. I can recognize the accent.
Hmm.
Someone from Louisiana talking to me English. I don't understand. It was like, what kind of accent is that? You know, talking with the accent. I'm like, I don't understand. Can you speak too fast? But all of that to say is like, imagine a little girl in Brussels, Belgium. You don't know these things.
Right.
You don't know those nuances. You know those differences. I have so much respect for African American culture, period, the Black people in general around the world. But I think the Black experience is so beautiful and powerful that it deserves more conversations like that. It's uncomfortable to say to someone, I am African,
Hmm.
I am Caribbean, and I think I'm better than you because you're African American.
Hmm.
I think conversations like that need to happen. Where this is coming from.
Yes.
So,
You're right. Angel, you're touching on it because we need to reveal it so that we can heal it. If we don't know, you know what I mean? We can't these and even, and I get culture wanting to culturally preserve, to preserve culture and identity. And so, not wanting to enter ethnic, I guess, or,
yeah,
marry. I understand families wanting to do that. I understand these conversations, but I think that it's up to our generation and those thereafter to start challenging these
definitely.
things. Right. And I think you and I talked about that a little bit. Like, we have to challenge the status quo for
Yeah.
how Black folk treat each other. Because, hey, in the same token, right,
Mm.
I know a lot of African, or first generation African kids, people that came up, came or were here earlier in their life, or they were born and raised in the States, but they're African. How their names would get made fun of, or their last names,
Yeah.
or they would be called unkind names by African Americans.
Yeah.
That's also something that was the norm that I saw, that I observed, that I even heard. It's kind of like that playground banter,
Hmm.
but you're not realizing that within that is also, I think, within African Americans was a, well, but I'm American. So like this, like the chase for status,
Yeah.
and albeit I would even say the chase for more proximity to whiteness. So if I remove myself from being like that African kid, you know what I mean, and I'm Black, you know, then that I'm American, so I'm a little closer to
True.
whatever
Yeah.
success looks like, which is, from what we grew up seeing, for the majority in the media at least, was white.
Yeah.
Whiteness was success.
And then what you're saying, it is very important because we're going back to that question: what's the difference
Mhm.
between slavery and colonization?
Mhm.
Experiencing colonization on your own land is it better or worse than experiencing slavery? Because I also listen to this story and narrative about, yeah, but you Africans over there like sold us and stuff like that, and and I understand.
Mhm.
To me, it's like being taken from where you from, experiencing all of that to get somewhere where you're not from, and then you've been enslaved for
Yeah.
so many, so many, so many, so many years. Is we still, heal. We're talking about healing. It's still
Mhm.
affecting us. It affects me. Even I'm not born in America. I'm not African American. I'm still affected by that.
Yeah.
So now imagine what it is to be over there,
Mm.
colonized on your own land for 100 until today. So the reason why I pick dance and movement is because there is so much that you can say without using a words, and
Yeah.
you can connect with so many people without judging. Because what we do
Mhm.
is dancing. So before hearing the sound of your voice, your accent, where you're from, we're just connecting to a certain level. I also observe a lot of similarities into music, dance, certain steps, certain dances that looks like something that I observe
Oh
because
yeah.
of dance. I travel a lot in my life, like you were referring to that, and I think that's
Mhm.
probably the reason why I am open minded. Probably I don't really judge because I've been in so many places, on this planet, and seeing like different culture is just amazing to me. I'm like, wow, this is beautiful. How do you dance again? How do you pronounce that?
Mhm.
So I felt like, imagine just that. Let's stop for a minute talking about, yeah, but like closest to whiteness, or what is the success of. Just think about being taken, put somewhere else, being enslaved for so long, and still have to fight for
Yeah.
freedom.
Right.
You stay on your continent. Are you better? And you've been colonized for
Mm.
100 years. Like, we also had something with names. Like
Mhm.
in my country, in Congo, at some point, it was like a civil war that happened, and then people from my tribe, like, if you were like, no, because of, your last name is associated with your tribe and stuff like that. So my tribe were persecuted.
Mhm.
So some people changed their names, for instance, just because of certain civil wars and stuff like that.
Okay.
Or I remember like one of the president, aka dictator in Congo, he was like, we don't want no Christian white names. So a
Mhm.
lot of people from that generation don't have first names. And
Wow.
I'm talking about that because now some of these people are from my generation. And I
Mhm.
remember like doing business with one of my guy or whatever, and then we did like some money transfer, and he doesn't have a first name. I know the story.
What do
When I
you mean,
to
Angel?
explain
So
that,
what's his
yeah,
name?
he does. So it's blank. On the ID is blank. You don't have a first name. You just have the last name. In Europe, they know that, so they will
Okay.
automatically use your last name as your first name in the system.
Right.
But here in America, in New York, I
Yeah.
was trying to get the money. They were like, but this person doesn't have a first name.
Yeah. I would like
So
here in America, it would flag as like a huge scam. Like, what's
exactly,
going on? You don't have a name,
you don't
but
have a
that's
first name.
powerful. Like, oh
That was just one of the stories. There's so many stories about, being
yeah.
African in Europe and being black in the world. And then you were referring also to, how sometimes African can be treated, here in
Hmm.
America. Like me, for instance, I have a thick French accent. But I speak five languages. So, sometimes when I go to different administration services and stuff like that, and I'm start to talk and speaking with my French accent, automatically people would think that I'm not educated, or I need
Hmm.
help, or I'm
Hmm.
immigrant. Yes, I am, but that doesn't mean that I'm stupid, that I don't have
Right.
education. You know what I mean? So that is something that I observe, and sometimes I've been, treated like roughly by my like people that look like me. A
Hmm.
lot, actually. I remember someone, I was making fun of my accent or whatever, and she was like, "Yeah, I'm like, okay, I grew up with people doing that to me in Europe at school. People who, like, I don't know, like, touch me and see if my skin was just like,
Hmm.
stuff like that. I grew up, unfortunately, I grew up in it, like in Europe. I
Hmm.
experienced a lot of racism, but I was not less racism or rejection for people that look like me. I'm gonna
Right.
be honest. Also, in Europe, Belgium and France, um, we don't really say I'm black or I'm French,
Hmm.
because we are in France or we are in Belgium. So we say, hey, we from? My dad is from Senegal, or such and such is from. So your country of origin is it's what I would say create your identity or your connection
Hmm.
with your black identity, if I would say.
Yeah.
Experiencing blackness as a whole, this is something that I learned here in America.
There's beauty in the fabric of that, of being like, oh, we black, you black, we get it. But then there a lot of that does get in our way of the individuality. And you
Mm,
hear consistently in the culture now, and culture I mean just society,
mhm,
being black is not a monolith. And because we want people to understand that there are so many nuances to that, or even all skin folk ain't kinfolk, right? The you have to kind of say those terms. Those terms exist because of the way that we've been clustered as one type of person, essentially. because of the color of our skin, texture of our hair, and
Mm.
facial features, and in no particular order, all of those things. You know what I mean? In
Good.
no particular order, all of those things. What the physical identifiers that have people say, "Oh, you look like that. You're then like this." And if you're
Mm.
not like this, people say you're the exception to the rule. How then, though, Angel, do you foresee African Americans and Africans of the diaspora, so that wherever they are, right? They could be in Belgium. How do you foresee there being some healing with regards to how we show up for one another?
You know, it's so deep. The
It's
question
so
is
deep.
so deep.
I know you can't answer that in 5 minutes
No,
or less,
I'm
but
gonna try to really summarize really what I'm thinking. I think unfortunately it will pass by one having uncomfortable conversation, right? For
mhm,
healing. But we also have to see us as a unit.
right.
Have those conversation about, you know, nuances, specifics, right? I remember like a time where you were like, "Oh, I'm gonna take a West African dance class." You know,
hmm
thinking about, right? You smile because you automatically know what I'm talking about.
hmm
It's like, oh, okay. So what does West African dance mean?
Well, we had one at in my at grad school. We had West African dance the first year of school. That was at Alvin Ailey, and it was like, yeah, it was cool. I loved it, but it's like, what did like where?
Right? It's like we're in West Africa. I
Yeah,
feel like today, I mean, back then it was probably more than enough for us to connect to dance and movement and drums
yeah,
and our spirituality and our roots. But in 2024, when we see like how Afrobeat or African pop music is now taking over, or you
hmm
know, a movie like Black Panther, and now everything is
hmm
about the Wakanda or the Wakandanization, you know, like, because of stuff like that. I mean, you tell me, but I didn't grow up with black heroes.
there were other black superheroes that were in film,
Mm,
but nothing to my knowledge, um, was as wide and mainstream and just widespread as Black Panther. And
yeah.
so, and nothing was, we hadn't seen anything like that. We
Hmm.
hadn't even seen a world where Black people in Africa were tucked away with the most precious resource that the world needed and successful and thriving
Yeah.
and glorious and just so that imagery, right?
Yeah.
um we hadn't seen it, which is why that juxtaposition in Black Panther of Oakland, right,
Yeah.
which Oakland is such a cultural hub, has so much culture and identity,
Mm.
and a lot of that through gentrification, which I do believe is colonization in a very fancy form.
Yeah. Agree. I did. You know what? I never put it together like that, but you absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I because I remember when I first moved to New York in 2013, I moved to Brooklyn and I was on Hancock in Brooklyn. Hancock and is it No Street? No. And Hancock, it doesn't matter. I was gonna buy
It's
it's
not best
Malcolm X
friend.
there. It doesn't matter. I was on Hancock. And I remember when I moved, so nice brownstone neighborhood, in Bed-Stuy. I remember when I moved there, it was black, for the most part, Caribbean to be exact, to be very specific. But then I went away for the holidays. So I was gone for about a month because I was in grad school. So we had a month off. I come back. So I move in September. I leave in middle of December. I come back in the middle towards the end of January. And I kid you not, there were IKEA bags and white kids everywhere. And I was like, what
I
just
feel bad.
happened?
It's so funny
It
because
was,
IKEA it's a European brain, right?
yeah, 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 yeah,
So
yeah.
it's so interesting. But go ahead. Sorry. Finish your thought.
But it was indicative though, because people were towing, the big IKEA. It was indicative that folks were moving in. And funny story, Angel. I mean, I knew I had some insight, but I think maybe being removed from it, I came back into it and I was like, this looked different, but it happened fast. But when I moved, there was a tour of a new apartment building that was right next to a black church before I moved to Bed-Stuy. And I remember going in that, I was in that building, and it was a bunch of white youth millennials from elsewhere America who were there, and they were doing a tour. And it was those small apartments, but they were squeezing us into a brand new building in the middle, in the heart of Bed-Stuy. They said to us, and one of the leasing agents said, if someone comes up to you, someone from this neighborhood, whatever, you just ignore them. Essentially, if you feel threatened or scared, just don't look at them. I was the only black person in that open house. It was an open house, probably about 30 of us, maybe
What
40
does
of
that
us,
mean? If
only black.
someone, what does that mean? They were talking about black
They
people?
were saying, it was clear they were saying, if someone from the neighborhood, someone from the hood, you know what I mean, is looking at you, just like kind of have your blinders on and don't give them eye contact, like it's an animal.
Wow. Like if it was like a zombie town, like give
Yeah.
you like some
Oh yeah.
tips
Oh
how
yeah.
to escape.
And so I was aware of that. So now that's September 2013. So fast forward to January 2013 or 2014, I'm all of a sudden seeing these, white millennials, and I'm noticing some of them didn't give eye contact. They were like in the, again, colonization. I'm just putting it out there, in the world of Bed-Stuy, in the world of this black, culturally relevant, significant community,
Yeah.
borough, and not interacting with the people of that community. Does I don't know, Angel. I'm from here, so I'm used to the enslavement of my people, but don't that sound like the colonization to you?
I mean, a little bit different, but a little bit similar at the same time. In some
Mm-hmm.
experiences. Again, we have talking about Brussels, where I grew up and stuff. We have small neighborhoods. I would say we have more Africans
Mm-hmm.
from Congo, or more Africans from the north of Africa, Morocco, Tunisia, and stuff like that. So we have small communities like that, but it's nothing compared to. I would just compare it to New York. So
Mm-hmm.
this kind of segregation model
Yeah.
doesn't really apply in Brussels.
Okay.
Now, in France, it's different. We call les banlieues, where like they pushed people away from the capital and then created quote unquote ghetto, quote unquote. That is
Mm-hmm.
a fact in France, for instance, in Paris, because I was between
Mm-hmm.
Paris and Brussels. I grew up. It's less of that in Brussels. It's more like neighborhoodish. All of that
Okay.
to say, the concept of either living together or being separated, completely
Mm-hmm.
separated, it's very different and interesting. Yes, the gentrification is real because now I live here. I understand exactly everything that you just mentioned and described is something that I experienced because I still live between Bushwick and Bed-Stuy. Like my daughter goes to
Okay.
school in Bed-Stuy and I live in Bushwick. So there's neighborhood. Like I know exactly what you referring to because I moved in here 2011 and now with 2024 it's a complete different word.
Yeah.
Not even neighborhood, completely different word. So
Mm-hmm.
I do understand, and I think there is similarity into this concept of pushing people away
Yes, pushing
and
people
make it
out.
looks more this or that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think
Mm-hmm.
like fighting for freedom or fighting for rights and equality and all of these things, right? Is like by doing that, everything becomes more expensive. By
Yeah.
doing that, you're pushing away a group of people again. They were already like fighting for their right, and this is tiring. Again,
Mm-hmm.
to go back to this black identity, right? That was the question you asked me. I feel like whether you're African, Caribbean, or African American, you will endure, that situation.
Yes.
Regardless of how much money you make, people will look at you because of the color of your skin, like you mentioned. If certain people from the neighborhood is talking to you, they did not even refer about classicism
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
you could be this, that, and third, and make even more money than the people who live
Yes.
in this neighborhood. And I think like having those conversations, understanding what does that mean for you, African Americans, to see some of your neighborhood being gentrified. as an
Mhm.
African Caribbean woman born in Europe that lives in America, New York now. One of my priority to understand that.
Yeah.
So, like when we have conversation like that, you're telling me IKEA, I can relate to IKEA because IKEA it's a European brain, and I grew up, when I'm sure anybody was watching this interview now is somewhere in Europe. I have my blue my blue IKEA bag, feel me, that you use as a storage, or maybe like
Absolutely.
a free laundry bag. Feel me? So, like those things, we can laugh about certain things and don't take ourselves so seriously while still educating ourselves,
Yeah.
loving each other, because my experience, right, is different than yours. But
Yeah.
I feel like me learning from you and you learning from me and us learning from each other, removing this uncomfortableness about thinking like, if you think like you're African American and you're better than African, I want to have a conversation with you. If you're
Hmm.
African or Caribbean and you think you're better than African American, let's have a conversation where this is coming from. And then, after us talking about, yeah, my grandmother was saying that, da, 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 da. Don't play with those people. Don't go, da, 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 because that's what. And then when you start digging, opening books and having conversations, then you're like, oh, okay, so that was actually not true. That was
Hmm.
wrong. That was based off fear or based
Yes.
of a narrative that doesn't apply today in 2024. So when I teach, I like to say to people like going back to dance and movement, like, saying like I'm going to take a West African dance class is not enough in 2024. If it wasn't enough for Black Panther, all right, I give you a pass. Because of the Wakanda, you have to be specific, my brother. Where,
Yes.
and I take my French accent, like, where in the west of Africa do you not do this? Because even like, I'm from Congo, right? If you're referring to West African dance as a traditional African dance form, what about people from the East? What about people from the South? They also have traditional art forms that also
Right.
need to be celebrated. So it's an idea of, because of slavery, yes, taken from different areas of Africa, sent from West Africa to the Americas. But as you're doing slavery for business for 400
Mhm.
years and more, you have to go deeper into Africa. So yeah,
Yes.
not everybody has roots only in the west of Africa. So these
Hmm.
conversations are just like ongoing, beautiful, inspiring, and I think like the more we address it, the less it becomes a problem and more we have room for healing.
I love that. The more we address it, the less it becomes a problem and we have room for healing. I love that. An actual form of conversations, and that conversation has to be amongst one another. It
Mm.
can't just be yelling into, you know what I mean, into the ether to people who are of your same group or of more shared experiences. When we have those conversations cross culturally, then we are able to really get closer to that healing, conversations like this. And so it was so cool coming full circle when we saw the comedian Godfrey on Shannon Sharp's podcast just last night, talking about this and talking about being, Nigerian American, right? Or having parents that are from Nigeria, and how you're people are like, oh, but you're not really because you're born here, you're Black, and like, how do we identify that? And I also think that, you know, they're speaking of what you've said regarding the um, just regional, right? Like, oh,
Mm.
where in West Africa, where in Africa? It's a continent. Um, is that, that's the same conversation that I know Black Americans are having, is like, yeah, I'm from the Bronx. Even like you said, I'm from Louisiana. These cultures are different. Like, where in the United States are you from? Where did you grow up? That changes what your experience and what your viewpoint is going to be. But Angel, somehow we've been talking for almost an hour, which is amazing.
Really? Already?
Yes,
We didn't we have to do a part two. We have to
yes, I
do part
know. So
two
I want to do
and talk
part
about
two.
dating.
Oh,
What
oh, listen, you want to talk about dating? We can get into that. Okay, we can get into that.
No,
Absolutely.
we gotta address, like, because there is this, idea of, yeah, African men are treating
Mhm.
you better than da da da, or African American men are this da da da, or African women. Da, da. I think it's also, very interesting conversation to have maybe for part two,
Love
and
it.
go deep, dig into those things because there's a lot of funny stories out there. Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's y'all. We're gonna do a part 2. We're gonna talk about dating Black men from across the world. Okay, from across the globe, from
Period.
all over.
Period.
We're gonna get talking about Black men from here, there, and everywhere. That's gonna be.
Let's do it.
I'm into it. I'm into it. Angel, thank you so much. Where can we find you? How can we support you?
So, I'm the founder of Afro Dance New York. I was
Yeah.
wearing my t-shirt today, but angelkaba.org, or just Google Angel Kaba Dance or Angel Kaba Wakanda. No, I'm joking. Angel Kaba Wakanda. So, yeah, angelkaba.org. I'm, everywhere, very active online. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Instagram, Facebook, everywhere. So, thank you so much for having me. I love you so much, and I wish you all the best.
Oh, I love you too, Angel. And thank you for having me. Thank you for contacting me and saying, hey, let's do this. Let's have this conversation. All right, y'all. This has been another episode of Inside Out Podcast. Before you go, remember, make sure you subscribe, make sure you follow. And if you want some Inside Out Podcast swag, make sure you check out the Inside Out Podcast store. The link will be in the info box wherever you are watching or listening to Inside Out Podcast. Bye.
Bye.
Wait. Before you go, don't forget to like this episode. Give it a thumbs up or a heart, depending on where you're watching or listening, and comment. I will continue the conversation with you in the comments, and be sure to subscribe wherever you watch or listen to Inside Out Podcast. You can catch Inside Out Podcast on YouTube. Of course, you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Audible, Amazon Music, or iHeartRadio. And y'all, that is not it. If you really love you some Inside Out Podcast, there is a Patreon community just for you. For only $15 per month, you can join the Patreon as a member. And every 3 months, I will send you some Inside Out Podcast swag, y'all. Yes, straight from the Inside Out Podcast store, just for showing us some love. You can, of course, follow Inside Out Podcast on Instagram and TikTok. Thank you for showing us love, and stay tuned for the next episode.